Hi, everyone, and welcome to Moments of Hope Church Online. I'm Jen Houston, and we're so glad you've tuned in today. Before we get started, I'd love to share some encouragement with you from Psalm 50, verses 14 and 15. It says, "Offer to God a sacrifice of thanksgiving, or make thanksgiving your sacrifice to God, and perform your vows to the Most High, and call upon me in the day of trouble, and I will deliver you, and you shall glorify me." You know, God takes so much pleasure when you lift your voice to Him in thanksgiving. He will deliver you. It's His promise. As we get started today, I'd like to let you know about a couple of events coming up at Moments of Hope Church. First of all, Hope Big Kids, those are children grades 1st through 5th, are going to have a Christmas party at Providence Square on Saturday, December 3rd. Next, Christmas at Hope Farm. If you haven't been to Hope Farm, this is the chance to get out there and just explore the beauty and the majesty of God in His creation amongst community. This is going to be on December 10th from 3 to 6 p.m. Please register for this event so we can be prepared for you. Finally, we have 3 different Christmas Eve services that we will be offering for you at Providence Square. They'll be at 1 o'clock, 3 o'clock, and 5 o'clock. We will have one in-person worship service on Christmas morning on Sunday at 11 a.m. at Providence Square. We have a great page on our website for all these details for you and your family to decide what's best for you. Check out all the events at momentsofhopechurch.org/events. Now let's turn our hearts to worship and maybe put into practice the encouragement I had at the beginning of the service. Lift your voice to God in thanksgiving and praise.
Find a way to praise you from the bottom of my broken heart. 'Cause I think I'd rather strike a match than curse the dark. I'll find a way to thank you, though bitterness is real and hard. I'd rather take a chance on hope than fall apart. Oh, I don't think I'm ready to surrender to the dark. Even if my daylight never dawns, even if my breakthrough never comes, even if I'll fight to bring you praise, even if my dreams fall to the ground, even if I'm lost, I know I'm found, even if my heart will somehow sing hallelujah anyway. I hear a hymn of triumph, the wilderness of my limits, and the lowlands or the mountain tops I won't forget. daylight never dawns, even if my breakthrough never comes, even if I'll fight to bring you praise. Even if my dreams fall to the ground, even if I'm lost and unfound, even if my heart will somehow sing hallelujah anyway. Hallelujah anyway. Hallelujah anyway. Our God is an awesome God, He reigns. 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 Let it rain, let it rain. Open the floodgates of heaven. Oh, let it rain, let it rain. Open the floodgates of heaven. Oh, let it rain, let it rain. Open the floodgates of heaven. Oh, let it rain, let it rain. Open the floodgates of heaven. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. 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 That is who That is who our God is an awesome God, He reigns. That is who our God is an awesome God, He reigns. That is who our God is an awesome God, He reigns. That is who our God is an awesome God, He reigns.
Hi, everyone. In case you don't know, I'm David Chadwick, and I'm the founding pastor of Moments of Hope Church. It's been my privilege to walk you through the book of Genesis since last January. Today, we're going to look at Genesis chapter 37, and it's a pivotal moment in the study of Genesis, for we are moving away from the study of the great patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You see Jesus, for example, in the New Testament, praying to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They are the three major patriarchs, the fathers of the Jewish faith, the ones who built on the 12 tribes of Israel, formed the nation of Israel, through which Jesus comes into the world to save us from our sins. But the fourth character who gives oversight to the book of Genesis is named Joseph. He is not one of the patriarchs, but from Genesis 37 through 50, you have the rest of Genesis, and you have the testimony or the story of Joseph. Now, why this story? I think there are two answers. First of all, and we're going to see it at the end of today's message, there is a foreshadowing, or what's in fancy theological terms called a typology of the life of Joseph and the life of Jesus. That you see in the life of Joseph a foreshadowing or a type of the life of Jesus. And folks, after you see some of these things, it's just absolutely extraordinary. But I think there's a second reason for the importance of the story of Joseph, and that's answering the question at the end of Genesis 50 and then to Exodus 1. And for you who know your Bible, it's Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. There is a 400-year gap between the end of Genesis 50 and Exodus 1:1. Well, what happened during those 400 years? And we see in the life of Joseph how the people of Israel got down to Egypt to cause the story to recommence in Exodus chapter 1, verse 1. There was a prophecy that was given by God to Abraham in Genesis chapter 15, verses 13 through 16. Right after God called Abraham as the first patriarch, God gave him a prophecy about his lineage, about all those who would follow him. Listen to these verses. Again, Genesis 15, starting with verse 13, we see that God says to Abraham, "Know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and will be servants there, and they will be afflicted for 400 years. That Abraham's lineage, his offspring, are going to be in a land where they will be slaves for 400 years. And we know, of course, that Exodus 1 verse 1 opens up with the Israelites in the land of Egypt, sojourners there, enslaved by the Egyptians. Verse 14, "But I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. As for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried in a good old age, and they shall come back here in the fourth generation." This is key. "For the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete." So God tells Abraham that he's going to die in old age in a state of peace, that his offspring will eventually be in that nation called Egypt. God will judge that nation called Egypt. He will bring them out and bring them back to the land of Canaan that God had promised to Abraham, that he promised to Isaac, that he promised to Jacob, that's still promised to the Jews today, for they feel that land was given to them by God in perpetuity forever. And here you see the next part of this promise to Abraham concluding with, "For the sins of the Amorites had not yet become complete." Now what does that mean? Well, after Abraham lives in that land for a while, and he and Isaac and Jacob are moved around, it is controlled by the Amorites, the Canaanites, and they committed all kinds of heinous, graphic, gross sins. They were involved in Baal worship, which was polytheistic. They practiced male and female prostitution in their temples, just performing all kinds of godless sexual perversion. They sacrificed their young children to the god of Baal for the purpose of giving them fertility in their land. So they were performing many gross acts of godlessness that honestly, folks, remind me of today in America and throughout our world, like in the days of Noah that we read about previously in Genesis 6. And as we read about the 400 years until the sin of the Amorites had become complete, Then God says at the moment of the fruition of all of their sins, where there's no doubt of their godlessness, there's no doubt of their need for God's judgment upon that godlessness, it will be then that God brings the Israelites out of the land of Egypt and uses them as his instrument of judgment against this godless people, and they will then inherit that land that God has promised to them. But it'll be 400 years after the promise was made to Abraham. Now, I'm just going to make this very quick comment because I believe God has called me to speak the truth. I hope I'm doing this in love. But as we as a nation continue to go against the moral character and law of God, as we, for example, as a government in our nation, seek to codify what marriage is between two people in any state whatsoever, you know that God made marriage to be between a man and a woman in a committed heterosexual monogamous covenant. That's his will. It's outlined in Genesis 2:24. Jesus restated it in Matthew 19. Paul restated it in Ephesians 5. So we see that biblically as God's intention, and he wants every nation to seek after his will. Now, I know the argument that America is largely a secular nation. There are many people that don't follow Jesus nor believe in the will of God. All I know to say is, at the moment, a government which is placed in charge as the head of the people in that land start to go against God's natural law and God's original intent, that nation will ultimately be judged by God. Now, it may take 400 years. But at some point, as nations and individuals suppress God's truth and do not follow his natural ways, especially outlined in his word, we will pay the consequences for it. At some point, only God knows, our nation will bear the rotten fruit of seeking after godless ways. And again, I don't know when that will be. It could be 400 years from now, but there is a point where every nation that suppresses the truth of who God is and then approves of unnatural laws that are not in accordance with his will, that nation will suffer. So I would hope every government throughout the world would seek God's laws and have laws in their nation that reflect the law of God and his purposes, for that nation will be blessed. But any nation that moves away from God's intended purposes will not be blessed, will have curses come upon it, and the judgment of God ultimately. And that's what God was saying here. So in Abraham's lineage, there would be 400 years where his people, the Jews, would be placed in a captivity in a foreign land called Egypt, and then God would deliver them after those 400 years because the sin of the Amorites was then complete, and God would use that nation as his instrument of judgment against the Amorites in that godless place, in God's land that he wanted the Jews to live in. So we answer the question with the story of Joseph of why in the world does Joseph take center stage in this story in the book of Genesis? And one of the answers is clearly that God wants us to understand how the Jews got to Egypt in Exodus 1:1 after 400 years, as God told Abraham it would happen in Genesis 15:13 through 16, and we will see that happen in the next months as we move through the last part of the book of Genesis. So let's go to Genesis chapter 37 right now and look at the next part of the story. This is the word of the Lord. Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. So Jacob's now in the promised land, and here is his generations that followed from him. Joseph, here's the major character that sets to the center stage here in the latter part of the book of Genesis. Joseph, being 17 years old, so he's a teenager here, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. So Jacob has 4 wives in his life. All 4 of them produced now 12 sons and 1 daughter, Dinah, and Joseph is the second of the 2 sons born to Rachel, Jacob's favorite wife among the 4. And we can see here that he brings a bad report back to his father Jacob. Now, is this favoritism, or had God, through or had Jacob, through God's provision, seen in Joseph some spectacular leadership abilities that was well beyond the other 11 sons that he had. I think personally that's what's going on here. Jacob had put Joseph in charge of the other sons because he saw an extraordinary leadership giftedness, and he had huge flocks and huge herds and a lot of possessions, and he knew Joseph had that quality to oversee his brothers. Now, he brings back a bad report about his brothers. Maybe they were lazy, maybe they were critical of their dad. We're not sure, but he brings that bad report back to his father. Now, Israel, that's Jacob's new name given to him by God. Jacob means trickster. Israel means overseen by God, one who allows God to work for him. God fights the battles for him. His name now is Israel. Loved Joseph more than any of the other sons because he was the son of his old age. So he'd been granted this child named Joseph, Jacob had, through Rachel, his beloved, after waiting many years. And he just loved Joseph more than the other boys. Maybe because he preferred Rachel as his wife. Maybe it's because, though, he saw, again, extraordinary giftedness, extraordinary leadership oversight abilities in Joseph's life and gave him those responsibilities. And he made him a robe of many colors. Now, some people think this is just a beautiful robe, rainbow colored, that Jacob made for Joseph to show the other boys that he just loved them more. But that's not the case. If you really look at the Hebrew word, it really means a multi-sleeved robe. It means that it was a robe that covered his entire body down to his hands. And it was the kind of robe that a foreman would wear over the other workers in the field. For they would not have a multicolored or long-sleeved robe. They would have a robe that would become half up their arms because they would have to, in contemporary jargon, roll up their sleeves in order to do all that dirty work in the field, overseeing the multiple numbers of flocks that were there. So this multicolored, long-sleeved coat was really a coat given by Jacob to Joseph to signify that he was the foreman over the boys, and he was the one they had to answer to, even though he was only 17 years of age, even though he was much younger. He was the one they had to turn to in order to get decisions made in overseeing the flocks. Verse 4, but when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all the other brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. So when they saw that he'd been given priority and privilege and power and oversight over them, that Jacob did favor him. Again, I think because he saw his leadership abilities. You're going to see throughout the book of Genesis, folks, there's not one negative thing ever said about Joseph. The only thing that some through the history of the church have been able to point to is maybe this kind of arrogance, and as we'll see in just a moment, his interpretation of his dreams that some thought were arrogant and made him seem like he thought himself better than the others. But really, I think it's just because he had been given the responsibility of oversight over his brothers, and this coat proved it, and the brothers hated him as a teenager for having this authority over him, and they would never even speak even peacefully about him. In other words, they wouldn't even say shalom to him, which is the blessing that Hebrews give to one another. Shalom, I pray blessings and peace upon you. They hated Joseph so much they wouldn't even say shalom. They wouldn't even greet him peacefully whenever they would see him. Now, Joseph had a dream. And when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. So he has this dream and he tells it to his brothers. And some think, again, it was a boastful, arrogant, prideful statement to his brothers. I think either he just processed verbally, which is what I do a lot of, and sometimes it's gotten me into trouble, is I process verbally and people think I'm making a decision, but I'm not really making a decision. But I think it's more that Joseph wasn't just processing verbally. I think he was speaking the truth to his brothers, that God had given him this vision, and he speaks the truth in love to his brothers of what is going to happen in the future. He said to them, "Hear this dream that I have dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright, and behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." He's just telling truthfully what the dream said, that one day Joseph's sheaf would be preeminent over all of their sheaves together, and they would bow down before him. And folks, if you know the rest of the story of Genesis, that's exactly what happened. But verse 8, his brothers said to him, "Are you indeed to reign over us?" I'm sure they said this scornfully and disdainfully. "Or are you indeed to rule over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. They already hated him. They wouldn't even wish him shalom. They wouldn't even speak a kind word to him. Now they hate him even more so than they did beforehand because he spoke this dream to them. Then he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, "Behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon," that's his mom and his dad, "and 11 stars," that's his brothers, "were bowing down to me." And when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have dreamed?" Obviously, it's a dream where the whole family of Jacob bows down before Joseph. And Jacob gets angry too and says, "What is this dream that supposedly you have had?" He continues, "Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you? I mean, can this possibly be? Who do you think you are?" Is it an arrogant statement, or is it Joseph simply speaking the truth? Because, folks, later on, if you've read through the book of Genesis, you know this is exactly what happened. But here's an interesting parenthesis from the mind of Jacob. "And his brothers were jealous of him." Envy can kill, folks. It is the first negative emotion that leads to an action of trying to take somebody out. It is the hidden disease, jealousy and envy. It's one we never admit to because it's so heinous and hideous, but that's what was really going on with his brothers. Indeed, later on, we're going to see in the life of Jesus, in the book of John, for example, John tells us the reason the Pharisees, the religious leaders, nailed Jesus to the cross was because of envy, was because of jealousy. But his father kept this saying in mind. So even though he responds negatively to Joseph's speaking the truth about these two dreams, especially the second one, he kept them hidden in his heart. I wonder why. Could it be because he had had his own dream from God with what we call Jacob's ladder? And he dreamed of that ladder being like an escalator, if you will, going up and down from heaven, angels going up and down on that escalator, God being at the top of that escalator. And Jacob had that dream that came to him that shared how the angels of heaven were coming down to help call him and oversee him and use him to be one of the patriarchs in the important plan of God in redemption of this world and the forgiveness of our sins. He had a dream that was very important to him that helped spur his faith. It was his first real encounter with God. So I'm sure he's thinking, how can I deny my own special son who is greatly gifted having dreams from God when I had my own dream from God, which was very important in my own life? The story continues in verse 12. "Now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem." So the brothers leave and they take the massive numbers of flock with them north of Shechem. Remember, Shechem was the godless city where Dinah, these brothers' sister, was assaulted, where they killed a lot of the men in that area and absconded their possessions themselves. So they go north of Shechem, about 50 miles or so, and Israel, now that's Jacob's new name, remember? Now he is one who believes that God is fighting his battles for him. Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." And he said to him, "Here I am." Notice the obedience of the son Joseph to his father. He's the foreman, and his father's sending him now to oversee the boys wherever they may be watching his flocks. So he said to him, "Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring me word." So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem, and a man found him wandering in the fields, and the man asked him, "What are you seeking?" "I am seeking my brothers," he said. Tell me, please, where they are pasturing the flock. And the man said, well, they have gone away, for I have heard them say, let us go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. And Dothan is about 10 miles north of Shechem. So they had gone north of Shechem, now back to Dothan, about 10 miles north of Shechem, and that's where they are pasturing their flocks. And there are many commentators who think that Jacob owned land in Shechem. He had bought some places there when he moved there before that disastrous experience with Dinah, his daughter, happened. And now he still owns that land, so he can send his sheep there via his sons in order for them to have enough pasturing land to keep them alive and well. Verse 18, they saw him from afar. The brothers see Joseph from afar. And before he came near to them, they conspired. They made a plan. They plotted against him to kill him. They said to one another, here comes this dreamer. They're always dream killers, folks, whenever God's given you a dream. Here are Joseph's dream killers, his brothers. Here comes this dreamer. Come now. Let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Now, let me take a moment and explain to you what these pits are. They are cisterns, and they are dug out into the ground, usually in places where there is rock, and they are very deep. They are then plastered over, and the purpose of these cisterns is to gather rainwater so that when the dry season comes, there will be enough water there to water the flocks and sheep and those in the cities themselves who need water in order to live. So these pits are hewn out, usually in rock, and then plastered over places to gather rainwater. And you know, as you read the book of Jeremiah, for example, God calls the Israelites in their abandonment of his love and disobedience to his laws broken cisterns. They are cracked cisterns where the plaster has cracked and the rainwater flows into them, but just flows out. They aren't gathering and sustaining living water for animals and people themselves. So that's what a pit was that the brothers are describing here. Let's capture Joseph and throw him into one of these pits after we have killed him. Then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams. But when Reuben heard it, he rescued Joseph out of their hands, saying, let us not take his life. And Reuben said to them, shed no blood, throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him, parenthesis here, that he, Reuben, might rescue him / later out of their hand to restore him to his father. So real quickly, if you remember when the whole thing with Shechem and the other situation blew up, Reuben was the one who then went in and slept with Jacob's mistress and one of the 4 women, one of the maidservants, and thus was declaring himself as the firstborn and the one who was ready to take over the entire clan. Jacob hated Reuben for doing that. You're going to see in Genesis 49 later when Jacob pronounces blessings, he does not pronounce a blessing upon Reuben because of that hideous act of going into his maidservant. And so Reuben's out of favor right now with Jacob. And so here he says, let's not kill Joseph. Let's just throw him into the pit. And then he had a plan to come back later and take Joseph out of the pit, restore him to his father, and thus, I'm sure in his own mind, he's thinking, that will gain me favor with my father, and perhaps he'll give me that first place because I'm the firstborn among all the 12. He'll give me back that place so that I can have the law of primogeniture, I can have all the blessings, and I can have all the favor of my father upon my life. That's what he's thinking right now. He's thinking to spare Joseph's life, throw him in the pit, yes, have some kind of the bloodthirstiness of the other brothers satisfied, but he'll come back and save him to, again, regain favor with his father. That's the plan from Reuben's standpoint. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the robe of many colors, the long-sleeved robe that showed that he was the foreman, he was the one in charge of the others, that he wore, and they took him and threw him into a pit. They threw him into one of these cisterns. Now, here's what I want you to imagine. I want you to imagine like a 10 by 10 plastered in swimming pool. You jump in and there are no ladders, and you have no way of getting out. It's just plaster. You can't climb out. You can't grab roots. You can't grab rocks in order to climb out. It's a plastered in 10-foot by 10-foot pit cistern. That's what Joseph is thrown into. And the pit was empty. There was no water in it. Now you understand why that little phrase, there was no water in it, is so important in understanding that it wasn't just a pit, it was a cistern that gathered water in order to feed flocks and people who lived near it. Then they sat down to eat. This is so amazing. So Joseph's in that pit. You know, he's stripped naked. He is crying out to them, "Save me. Brothers, what are you doing to me?" And they are so insensitive, angry, and just hurtful of their feelings against Joseph that they're ignoring his cries, but also just eating lunch as they do so. They're just having, a Whopper with cheese, eating it and talking with one another, yucking it up, while Joseph is probably crying out to them, "Please save me." And looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels bearing gum, balm, and myrrh, 3 precious gifts that they could sell in Egypt because they were so sought after. They were traders bringing those 3 products mostly on their camels on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, "Hey, what profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? I mean, we can't make any money off a dead Joseph. I've got a plan." He says, "Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not one of our hand be upon him, for he's our brother and our own flesh." I mean, he's one of us. Let's not kill him. Let's at least make a little money off this deal. And his brothers listened to him. Then the Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pits and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. So there are 2 caravans going on here. One's the Ishmaelite caravan, one's the Midianite caravan. The Midianites buy Joseph for 20 shekels of silver, which is the price of a handicapped slave in that day. And then they give him to the Ishmaelites to take down to Egypt. Maybe there was some bargaining and price between them as well. And the price was 20 shekels of silver. They took Joseph to Egypt. There's the key. How did the Jews ultimately get to Egypt between Genesis 50 and Exodus 1? Here's the answer. The Ishmaelite caravan took Joseph down to Egypt. That's the key part of the story. Joseph needs to go to Egypt for Exodus 1:1 to make sense. When Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not in the pit, he tore his clothes and returned to his brothers and said, "The boy is gone, and where shall I go? My plan's thwarted. Dad hates me right now. This was my plan to be restored. Now that's gone. How do I get my problem solved?" Then they took Joseph's robe and slaughtered a goat and dipped the robe in blood. And they sent the robe of many colors and brought it to their father and said, "This we have found. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not." And he identified it and said, "It is my son's robe." Here's another example, folks, of the biblical principle of you reap what you sow. Galatians 6:7, don't be mistaken. God will not be mocked. You reap what you sow. How did Jacob inherit the blessing and benefits from his dad Isaac? He tricked them with a goat's skin, but also it was a trickery to get the benefits and blessing through a goat for himself. Now, look what's happening. The brothers are tricking Jacob with the story of a goat so that they can receive, like Reuben so wants, the blessings and benefits of being the sons of Jacob, and they didn't want Joseph to get them. He said, "It is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces." Then Jacob, and notice the name Jacob goes back and forth from Jacob to Israel. When he's behaving in faith with God, he's called Israel. When he's behaving like the old Jacob, the trickster, his name Jacob is used. He returns back to trickster now. He tears his clothes, put sackcloth on his loins, and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, "No, I shall go down to Sheol," that's the place of the dead for the Jews, "to my son mourning." Thus his father wept for him. Folks, these brothers kept from their father the truth of what happened to Joseph for 20 years. Now, later it's going to be exposed when Joseph is around 39 years of age. But for 20 plus years, this secret is kept from Jacob. There are family secrets sometimes we all have that we think are benefiting our family, but they really aren't. The truth should have been told to Jacob here, but he mourns and grieves for who knows how long, maybe throughout the entire 20 years, because there's a family secret that had not been told. I just don't believe in family secrets. I believe the truth needs to be brought into the light, and the grace and mercy of God claimed over that secret, and you see forgiveness and all of God's blessings then being poured out because people have behaved in truthful ways. But here, Jacob/Israel goes through extraordinary pain because of this family secret. Meanwhile, the Midianites had sold him, that's Joseph, in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. So Joseph, this magnificently gifted leader at the age of 17, is sold to Potiphar, a very powerful captain in Pharaoh's guard, and we're going to see what happens in chapter 39 with Joseph and Potiphar's wife, with a strange parenthesis in chapter 38 that I'll look at in a couple of weeks. By the way, John Casey's going to preach for me next week on Thanksgiving weekend. It's a standalone Thanksgiving message, but then we'll get to chapter 38 and then ultimately to chapter 39, the story of Joseph and Potiphar. But that's where chapter 37 ends today. And I want to make just a couple of profound insights into this text, which will help it come alive more and more to you. Remember, I said at the beginning, one of the reasons that Joseph is introduced into the narrative is, first of all, to show the foreshadowing of the life of Joseph to the life of Jesus. For in John chapter 5, verse 39, Jesus said to those who were listening, "You search the Scriptures because you think that in them you have eternal life, and it is they that bear witness about me." That all of the Scriptures point to Jesus. In Luke 24, when Jesus is walking on the road to Emmaus with those two disciples, they didn't at first understand who he was. During that 6-hour walk from Jerusalem to Emmaus, this amazing character unfolded to these two disciples the entire Old Testament and how it all pointed to Jesus. I can't wait to get to heaven, to check out that video and see how Jesus did that with those two disciples on the road to Emmaus. He's just basically saying all of the books of the Old Testament point to him. And in the life of Joseph, we see a caricature of the life of Jesus, a foreshadowing of Jesus, and how Joseph is in the story of Genesis, at least partly to start pointing us to the life of Jesus. Let me point out many of those things that I have seen in chapter 37 in Joseph's life that point to Jesus. May you all just stand in awe of this revelation, of the truth of God's Word and how powerful it is. It is the Word of God, not culture, but the Word of God guides our lives. Listen to this. Jesus and Joseph both loved deeply by their father. Jacob loved Joseph deeply. The Father in heaven loves his son deeply and dearly. Both Joseph and Jesus were chosen by their father to be their firstborn son. Not Reuben. Jacob chose Joseph. And Jesus is the firstborn son of all others in God's family who are born again, who come to faith in Jesus. Both Joseph and Jesus were sent by the Father to rule over their brothers. Joseph, obviously in the story I just read, Jesus sent by the Father, leaving the splendor of heaven to come to this earth to rule over his brothers. But you know in John 1 that Jesus was not received by his brothers to rule over them, they did not allow him to do so at all. Both Jesus and Joseph were rejected by their brothers. The brothers of Jesus not only rejected him, but crucified him. Both were shepherds. Jesus, the great shepherd, as we see in John 10:1, over our souls. Both Jesus and Joseph totally submitted to the Father's will. Both did whatever the Father asked them to do. Jacob asked Joseph to go to his brothers. He said, "Here I am." God the Father looked at God the Son and said, "Go into the world and be birthed in a stable in Bethlehem and save these people from their sins." And Jesus said, "Here I am." And he went in perfect obedience to the Father. Both had an earthly family who did not believe in their divine calling. Joseph went to his brothers, shared the dream. They did not believe it. Jesus came to his own, declared that he was the Father in human flesh who'd come to save them from their sins, and they did not receive him, not only generally as the Jews, but also specifically as his family. They continued to come to Jesus and say, "You need to come home. You're stirring up strife. You're going to end up dead." His own earthly family turned against him. Both Jesus and Joseph were rejected because of envy by their brothers. Joseph's brothers rejected him because they were jealous and envious. We see in the Gospel of John that Jesus' brothers, his earthly family, the Jews, the religious leaders, rejected him because of envy and jealousy. Both were sold for pieces of silver. Joseph, 20 pieces, which was the price of a handicapped slave. For Joseph was not perfect in every way. He still had sin, though we don't read about his sin in the story. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, Joseph included. So he was sold for 20 shekels of silver, the price of a handicapped slave. Jesus was sold for 30 pieces of silver, just the price of a slave. He was the perfect slave who came to die for our sins. Both Jesus and Joseph were stripped of their clothing. And in Revelation 19:13, we read that Jesus will return fully clothed in a robe of righteousness stained with blood. Both had valuable outer coats. Jesus' outer coat was taken and was gambled for by the Roman guards at the foot of the cross. Joseph's robe was so valuable, his brothers stripped him of it as well. Both wore a robe of authority. Joseph's given authority over his brothers. Jesus' robe that he has in righteousness, especially when he returns, will show his righteous power and authority over all people. Both Jesus and Joseph were thrown into a pit, into a hole, a grave for Jesus that he could not escape unless the Father raises him from the dead. Joseph, a pit, unless he's given a right hand to be lifted out by the Midianites to be taken to Egypt. Both had blood shed in their story. Jesus' blood shed on the cross for the forgiveness of our sins. In Joseph's story, the blood of a goat shed to try to recompense in their father's mind the death of Joseph. Both were taken to Egypt. Joseph here by the Ishmaelite caravan. Jesus as a little boy to escape Herod's ferocious anger to have all little boys killed. And Joseph and Mary flee to Egypt to protect Jesus. Both were separated from their father. Joseph here by his brothers. Jesus on the cross where he cried out, my God, why have I been forsaken by you?" All of the sins of the world poured out on Jesus, and at that moment the Father had to turn his back on his beloved and only Son. Both forgave the sins committed against them. You'll see later that Joseph forgave his brother's sins. When he meets them in Egypt 22 years later, Jesus forgave us and his persecutors on the cross. Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. Both turned over to the Gentiles to be killed. A conspiracy hatched by the Gentiles to kill them. Joseph's brothers conspired against him with this hatched up scheme. The Jewish leaders hatched up this scheme of this conspiracy to have Jesus killed by the Gentiles, by Pilate, by the Romans, so that they would not have blood on their hands. Both had people lying about what happened in the empty pit. the brothers going back and lying to their father about what really happened, the Roman guards being bribed not to tell that Jesus' body was not in that empty tomb. Both families bow down and worship Joseph and Jesus. One day you'll see it later in the book of Genesis how Joseph's family does bow down to him as the dream foretold. One day, Jesus' family, as all the families of the earth, will bow down and say that Jesus alone is Lord in accordance with Philippians 2:11. Both tell the truth no matter what. Joseph tells the truth to his brothers, not in arrogance, but in simply telling them the truth. Jesus said the truth will set you free, and he can only speak what the Father told him. He will only tell the truth to all of us about our sin and our need for a Savior. Both bring grace and mercy to others because of the pain of their pit. The pain of the empty tomb is what brings grace and mercy and forgiveness to all the people of the world. It's only because of the pit that Joseph can ultimately be taken to Egypt to give redemption, grace, mercy, forgiveness to his brothers and to save them from the famine that will surround them in the land. And both completely trusted their lives to God's providence, doing exactly what the Father asked them to do. As Joseph completely entrusted himself to Jacob's asking him to go to his brothers, being thrown into the pit, to going down to Egypt. You're going to later on see in Genesis 45:22 how Joseph says that he was sent before his brothers down to Egypt to spare the lives of many people. He trusted the providence of God, even in the pit. And you know, Jesus, even on the cross, trusted his soul to the Father and said, into your hands I commit my spirit, knowing that there was a bigger plan, a better providence that was going to occur. So you see the amazing connection between Jesus and Joseph, a foreshadowing of the life of Jesus in the life of Joseph. Again, I think that's one of the major reasons that 1/4 of the book of Genesis is all about Joseph. But folks, there's one final thought I want to leave with you today. There's also the beautiful trusting of our lives in the pit to the providence of God. Joseph entrusted his life in the inglorious, painful moment in the pit to God's perfect plan. And ultimately, he was lifted out of the pit, and God's plan was not only foretold, but accomplished through the life of Joseph. The same thing with Jesus. He entrusted his life to the perfect providence of the Father, and the empty tomb was what gave us grace and mercy, the forgiveness of our sins. I don't know if you're in a pit right now in your life. Maybe you are. But if so, could you entrust your awful pit to the perfect providence of the Father in heaven? In other words, there's a plan. There's an unseen, invisible providence that oversees the life of all people who entrust their lives to the Father and Jesus. Might you do so today, believing that your ugly pit is in the hand of the perfect providence of the Father, and He will work it for good. Might you believe in Genesis 50:20 at the end of the book of Genesis, where Joseph looked at his brothers and said, you meant this for evil. All that you did to me was evil, but God meant it for good. Could you trust God today? If so, you'll have purpose in the pit. You'll have providence in your pain. You'll be able to believe God's using everything together for His good in your perfect plan, and He will work all things for good. Trust Him today, dear friends. Believe in Him. His plan is perfect. He'll use even your pit moment right now for that purpose. Trust Him in every possible way. Father, I pray in the name of Jesus that no matter where people may be, first of all, they'd see in the story of Joseph Jesus and how beautiful God's Word is as you give us a foreshadowing in the life of Joseph of the perfect life of Jesus. But also in the story of the pit, how we can trust the providence, the unseen, invisible hand of God working all things together for good. And I pray anybody here today watching this message would release their pit experience, the pain of their pit to you, O Lord, and say, the pain is horrible, the pit is dark, but I trust your providence, Lord, that you're going to get me out and take me to the place where you want me to be. It might be years. It might be 22 years, like with Joseph, before he sees the perfect hand of God working, but I believe it will be shown. I believe it will happen. It's in Jesus' wonderful name I place now my life in your hands, O Lord. Amen and amen. Thank you for listening today. John Casey again next week will give the Thanksgiving message, and then we'll return to our study of the book of Genesis, chapter 38. May you see in our offering the ways that God is using this church for His glory in such magnificent ways. Let's go back to Jen Houston now.
What an awesome message from David. If today's message has touched you, we'd love to hear about it. Please feel free to chat below, find us on our website or our app. And if today's message has especially ministered to you, feel free to share it with your friends and family. We have a special page on our website called the Share page. You can find it at momentsofhopechurch.org/share. You'll find today's message as well as our archived messages and David's weekly Hopecast. Take advantage of this resource and feel free to share any of it with your friends and family. Now, I would like to let you know that because of your generosity and your partnership with us, we have just recently crossed the $3 million mark of our global giving. And it's because of your partnership, we are able to spread the kingdom to the world. If you would like to continue to sow into the ministry of Moments of Hope Church, there are many ways to give. You can click the Give button on the screen, you can give through our website or our app, or you can mail us a check to 4500 Cameron Valley Parkway, Suite 400, Charlotte, North Carolina, 28211. Thank you so much for partnering with us and for your generosity. We are so glad you were with us today. I pray that you've been encouraged in your faith and that this week as we approach Thanksgiving, you continue to lift your voice to the Lord and let Him know how thankful you are. We hope you'll join us next week.